In today's video, two partners attempt the crown of the Austrian Alps on a January night. On a technical winter ridge one of them has climbed many times and the other has never seen. In soft snowboard boots that cannot edge on ice, and a sports watch that records every error in its own evidence log, and a year later, at the Innsbruck Regional Court, a judge who is himself a Tyrol mountain rescuer will spend 14 hours studying that watch data, that webcam footage, and that helicopter pass, and conclude that everything that killed her was something he could have prevented before either of them ever roped in. The pattern repeats every winter in the European Alps. This is the first case Austria has ever prosecuted. The Grossglockner stands 12,461 feet in the Hohe Tauern range, the highest point in Austria, a glaciated alpine peak with several technical lines reaching its summit cross. The Stüdlgrat is its classic winter ridge, UIA 3-4, mixed rock and ice, a clean line for a fit and well-equipped pair on a stable day with an early start. None of those conditions applied on January 18, 2025, when Thomas Plamberger, 36, a chef from Salzburg, and his partner Kerstin Gurtner, 33, a physiotherapist, left the Stüdl hut at 6:45 a.m. The standard guidance was a 4:30 start. They were already 2 hours late before they touched stone. The Stüdl hut warden noted their late departure in his log. He noted the weather forecast. He noted the wind reading on his roof anemometer at the hour they left. The forecast called for sustained 80-kilometer winds by mid-afternoon. The reading on the anemometer was already 52. Higher up, the calculation would change. Robert Waller, the Alpine prosecutor at Innsbruck Regional Court, had spent 11 years working cases like this one. He sat on the Austrian Board of Trustees for Alpine safety. He had seen 285 fatalities a year on average across Austrian mountain terrain. He had filed maybe 5 charges of negligent homicide in his career, and almost all of them had involved paid commercial guides, not informal climbing partners. He had a particular discipline. He did not file unless the evidence was on paper. He gathered sports watch logs, mobile phone records, webcam footage, rescue dispatch transcripts, and Alpine technical assessments. By the time he sat down to charge Plamberger, he had 9 documented errors and a forensic medical report from the autopsy. He had photographs from the rescue team that contradicted the defendant's account. He had WhatsApp messages between the couple from the days before the climb, in which Gurtner had asked about the route and Plamberger had reassured her that the boots she owned would be sufficient. He had a witness from a prior climb. The first error was the choice of partner. Gurtner had never undertaken an alpine high-altitude tour of this length, difficulty, or altitude in winter. The prosecution would frame this as foundational. Plamberger, the responsible leader of the trip under Austrian Alpine law, knew her experience level. He had climbed with her before on easier ground in summer conditions. He chose the Stüdlgrat anyway. The second error was the start time, 2 hours late. The third error was the equipment. Soft snowboard boots and a split board for the descent, gear chosen for the ride down, not the climb up. Waller had seen, across his 11 years, exactly the kind of failure that follows when the equipment is wrong from the trailhead. He had buried climbers for the equipment errors of their partners. At 10 a.m., the climbing rope jammed somewhere on the rock band. Plamberger spent more than an hour working the rope free. The hour was not insignificant. On a winter alpine route, an hour lost at 10 a.m. is an hour stolen from the safety margin at 4 p.m. By the time they were moving again, the weather data Plamberger's watch was recording in real time had crossed standard thresholds. Wind was 74 kilometers per hour, -8 degrees Celsius air temperature, wind chill near -20 degrees. The Stüdlgrat winter protocol, taught at every guide school in the Eastern Alps, calls turnaround at sustained winds above 60. They were above 74. They kept moving up. They passed the point of no return on the ridge at 1:30 p.m. After this section, retreat becomes more dangerous than continuation. The Stüdlgrat is not a route you reverse easily in winter, particularly not in soft boots, particularly not in rising wind, particularly not with one partner already moving slower than the route demands. The decision to commit beyond this point in those conditions with that equipment, with that partner, would later be cataloged by the prosecutor as error number 5. Errors 6, 7, and 8. No bivouac shelter, insufficient emergency food, no registered turnaround time with the Stüdl hut warden. The hut warden noticed they were overdue. The hut warden made the call to Alpine rescue. He had 18 years of records in his guest book of climbers who had not come back from the Stüdlgrat in winter. He had recovered 3 of them himself. By 4 p.m., Gurtner could no longer feel her hands. Plamberger continued upward. He would later testify in court that they had been making good time together until the final approach, that she had encouraged him to push for the summit cross while she rested. The judge would compare this account against the webcam footage and the watch data and find inconsistencies he was unwilling to ignore. The court did not accept that she had been moving at the same pace. Her body data, when investigators reconstructed her core temperature decline from the sports watch logs, told a different story. She had been failing for hours. The watch had captured her decline in 15-minute increments since the first wind gusts had crossed the ridge in the early afternoon. At 6:30 p.m., the summit webcam recorded Plamberger arriving at the summit cross alone. By the prosecutor's reconstruction, Gurtner was 50 meters below, just under the summit ridge, exhausted, unprotected, hypothermic, and disoriented. She was conscious but no longer ambulatory. She told him, according to his own testimony, "Go on your own and save your own life." Whether she said this or whether he reconstructed it later, the judge would not adjudicate. The fact in the record was that he descended past her without staying. The fact in the record was that he had no bivouac to stay with. The fact in the record was that he had nothing to offer her except his own body heat, and his own body heat he chose to carry down. At 8:50 p.m., the couple were effectively unable to continue their journey. This is the language the prosecutor's press release would use. Effectively unable to continue. From this moment until 12:35 a.m., when Plamberger placed his first emergency call, Gurtner sat alone below the summit cross in winds approaching gale force at temperatures below -20 wind chill. She had soft snowboard boots. She had no shelter. She had no fire starter. She had no spare layers beyond what she had been climbing in. Her sports watch would record her heart rate dropping in measurable increments through each 15-minute window. The judge would see the chart. The defense would not be able to dispute it. The data was clean. The data was a witness no defense could cross-examine. At 10:50 p.m., a police helicopter, dispatched by Alpine Rescue after the hut warden raised the alarm, flew directly over the ridge. Its searchlights crossed the slope where Gurtner was lying. The helicopter circled. The crew were looking for distress signals. A waved headlamp, a flare, a strobe, anything. Plamberger heard the rotors. Plamberger saw the lights. He did not signal. He kept his phone on silent. He did not return rescue dispatch calls. This single moment, the helicopter passing without a signal, the prosecutor would describe as the cleanest evidence in the entire file. Across every panel discussion held in the Austrian Alpine community in the year that followed, the helicopter pass was the moment nobody could rationally explain. A working climber in the dark, watching rescue lights cross his partner's position, did nothing. The mountain would decide the rest. Plamberger called rescue at 12:35 a.m. The call was incoherent. He could not give a location. He then began descending alone, leaving Gurtner where she sat. Webcams recorded him moving down the ridge in the dark, his headlamp visible for stretches between rock features. At 3:30 a.m., he called rescue again. By this point, the prosecutor's office concluded, drawing on the forensic medical report, that Gurtner had been dead for several hours. The cause of death was hypothermia. Given the wind conditions on the Grossglockner that night, no helicopter could have landed safely on the upper ridge. Investigators noted that if Plamberger had stayed with her, sharing body heat in a snow trench dug with his ice axe, they might both have survived to the morning lift. He returned to her position roughly 6.5 hours later in daylight and found her dead. He photographed the scene on his phone. He descended. He told no one initially that he had returned. The forensic medical report would later confirm hypothermia as the primary cause. The court would note that the position of her body, as documented by the rescue team when they reached her, was not consistent with Plamberger's testimony that she had been sitting upright when he left her. Rescue photographs suggested she may have fallen. The judge raised this directly in his ruling, and the prosecution underlined it in closing. The Austrian Alpine community read the verdict when it came on February 19, 2026, as something close to a generational shift. Andreas Ermacora, who led the Austrian Alpine Club for a decade, told Courier this was the first time in the country's history an informal climbing partner had been convicted of negligent homicide for the death of his rope mate. The implication, threaded through every editorial in Die Presse and every panel discussion on Austrian Alpine radio, was that the casual partnership of stronger climbers leading weaker ones, the foundation of how alpinism is taught across Europe, now carried a documented criminal precedent. Climbers who once freely shared their expertise with less experienced partners would now have to weigh the legal risks before tying in. Ermacora himself had spent 4 decades on rope teams of mixed experience. He had brought partners onto routes they could not have climbed alone. He had also, in those 4 decades, watched 2 of them die. Judge Norbert Hofer, who himself works with Tyrrell Mountain Rescue, ruled that Plamberger was an excellent climber and that Gurtner was far less experienced. He ruled that the climb should have been canceled. He ruled that Plamberger's judgment was flawed at every decision point on the ridge that day. He did not believe Plamberger had intentionally abandoned her. "I do not see you as a murderer," he said in court. "I do not see you as a cold-hearted person." He sentenced Plamberger to a fine of €9,600 and a 5-month suspended prison sentence. The maximum under Austrian statute was 3 years. Both sides appealed within the week. The prosecution argues the sentence does not match the gravity of the conduct, particularly given the helicopter pass evidence and the prior incident in 2023 with Plamberger's former partner Andrea, who took the stand during the trial and described being left alone on a winter ridge by the same man, calling out into the dark while he kept walking. The defense argues the verdict itself is unsound, that Plamberger and Gurtner were equal partners and her death was a tragic mountain accident. The appeal will be heard in the months ahead. The legal community is watching closely. Austrian attorneys familiar with the statute have written that the case meets the bar the law sets, that the danger was obvious and foreseeable, that the disregard for elementary safety rules was conspicuous, that the conduct rose to gross negligence. The legal community is watching closely. The mountain rescue community is watching even more closely. The pattern in the Alps is not new. Every winter, partners of mixed experience attempt routes one of them has climbed before and the other has not. Every winter, some of them turn around in time, some of them do not. Across Europe, on average, the death toll for winter alpinism runs into the hundreds. What the Grossglockner verdict has changed is the question that hangs over every one of those decisions now. If she does not come back, will someone download my watch data? Will someone subpoena my WhatsApp messages? Will someone find the moment the helicopter passed overhead and ask why I did not signal? Austrian Alpine schools have begun training instructors to teach the case to new students as a fixed module. Bergführer associations across the Tyrol have begun rewriting their guidelines for informal partnerships above 3,000 meters. Sports watches have transformed winter alpine investigation in a way few climbers fully understand. Every step, every elevation gain, every wrist temperature reading, every heart rate spike is time-stamped and stored. When investigators downloaded Plamberger's watch and Gurtner's watch, they had a minute-by-minute reconstruction of the entire 21-hour climb. The defense could not argue she had been moving steadily when the data showed she had not. The defense could not argue the wind had only just risen when the anemometer recorded otherwise. The data did the work the witnesses on the ridge could not do. The mountain had stopped being a private place hours before either of them ever set foot on it. Every Austrian guide working winter terrain that February changed something quietly in his own practice. Some began registering more detailed turnaround plans. Some began carrying bivouac shelters they had previously left at the hut. Some began declining trips with partners whose experience did not match the route. The deadliest line in the Austrian Alps is not the hardest move on the hardest ridge. It is the gap between when an experienced climber should have turned his partner around and when he actually did. Plamberger had 9 chances on the Stüdlgrat. He took none of them. The webcam recorded his summit, the watch recorded her decline, the helicopter recorded his silence, the verdict from Innsbruck recorded everything else. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, click here for more.